Go into Google Images right now and type up video games. Guaranteed a third of all results will be featuring independent video games. That alone should tell you how celebrated and mainstream the smaller, more individual projects have become in recent years. Combined with the tools of game development being more accessible than ever, anyone can make a video game. And I mean anyone can make a video game. The market being more alive than ever means it's dramatically more competitive, so not every indie game is going to be a Hollow Knight or Undertale. A ton are destined to fall through the cracks and won't always be carried by social media algorithms. Until people start making video essays, that is. My goal here is to pluck 9 indie games from the Aether and give them a brief overview, some spoilers ahead, and play them for the first time to highlight them and give them the attention they so clearly deserve. This video wouldn't be possible without my generous patrons. Consider joining today to access a back catalog of exclusive videos and know that the reason I can create more videos is because of you. I spent more time than I care to admit picking the first game to showcase because first impressions are everything. What kind of game should I set the tone of the entire video with? These fears were squashed like an especially soft grape in the hand of a giant as I marathoned Psychopomp Gold with feverish intensity. Do you like Benadryl trips? Do you like dungeon crawlers? Do you like mentally unstable women? Doesn't matter if you like any of these or not, because Psychopomp Gold is going to force feed you. Open wide. A psychopomp is a term denoting any kind of spiritual being that guides deceased souls to their respective afterlives. A psychopomp could be an Abrahamic angel, a Shinigami. Nearly every culture or religion has some variant of a spiritual intermissionary that escorts the departed. But the term has taken root in psychology as well. Specifically during Carl Jung's era, the psychological definition is a mediator between the conscious world and the unconscious. Reality and dreams. They're often personified as an older, wise figure or even an animal, which is why so many video game guide characters are these little fairy creatures. Keep this root idea in your mind, that psychopomp has roots within religion and psychology alike, because both aspects are utilized to maximum effectiveness within the first few seconds of the game. You play as an unknown woman who accuses everyone around her of having secret powers they've all kept hidden from her. So she invented the machine that lets me read people's minds when I want it to, or the Psychopomp for short, which doesn't actually read minds, but lets her access a previously unknown world full of weird creatures and structures beyond the perception of man. So the game's entire plot is that one episode of Invader Zim where Dib wears one of his dad's devices and he gets schizo visions of a nightmare world. This schizo part is especially pronounced. There isn't so much in the way of whimsy or adventure or gallantry here, because our journey has more in common with a one-night stand inside of a Denny's with the Hat Man. Nearly every explorable location follows a rigid, twisted philosophy. Every public building, like a school or hospital or sewage plant, has a secret underground section that can be accessed with an elevator that will lead you through a demented facsimile of its proper form, like the school that hides a manufacturing plant underneath that creates artificial teeth to be implemented inside of the children to groom them for being mindless working drones in the future. Each location has a different conspiracy attached that makes zero attempt to sound even remotely plausible for a conspiracy theory, which plays entirely to the game's strengths. It settles us into the shoes of our paranoid and delusional protagonist, making us feel like a prisoner in our own mind, gracelessly thrown into a violent and surreal world that makes no sense whatsoever. This is not your everyday surrealism, mind you. Locations don't feel entirely alien, they feel so introspective and peering that it's deeply unsettling. The Children's Hospital was, without question, my favorite location for how uncompromisingly freaky it is. A conspiracy theory surrounding a children's hospital is already an uncomfortable thought, but the revelation that the children are intentionally gaslit and they suffer solely to extend the lives of the unspecified wealthy class is somehow hardly the most shocking revelation. Some of these wealthy people are personified as Plato, Alexander the Great, and Cleopatra, who embody pederasty, conquest, and lust in that order. Something about the groaning ambience mixed with this monstrous representation of Plato talking about how much he enjoys preying on kids got under my skin something fierce, which isn't something that happens very often. It makes me really weary of all the blocks with his face on them. Every vague conspiracy doesn't feel like a poorly veiled allegory or metaphor meant to make you reflect on anything. but rather a tapestry of delusion and ramblings constructed from the brain scans of a dead/X user. There's a commitment to messing with taboo topics in a way that skirts being abused in poor taste that genuinely floored me. Just ideas and concepts and visuals that are occasionally just plain foul. Just saying the word secret shower and seeing whatever this is feels like scraping something from the back of my mind that I would really rather be private. But maybe I just expose myself for something at the same time, and I'm seeing something that isn't there. However, there is reprieve from the filth. At least metaphorically. The sewage treatment plant, which converts poo-poo water and back into drinkable water, contains a whole labyrinth kingdom of gelatinous blobs with anime girl faces, and a race of downtrodden rat people called Thraits, who have very interesting personalities. Not everything is outwardly threatening and disturbing. There are flickers of civilization within the madness. You get a limited choice of locations per layer, with each layer becoming less and less coherent and far more esoteric. Layer 2 has us exploring a fleshy city, and Layer 3 has us exploring primordial concepts of numbers and mathematics embodied by these rejected Zen creatures. The 3D models made in Blender look charmingly unfinished and wet, like a rotting moldy tongue flipped inside out and stapled onto the body of something else. There's a distinguished level of grotesqueness, of cosmic voyeurism here. The moon and even the earth have these freakish eyes that never blink. Cancer cells and buildings are personified and given life in the form of these CGI monstrosities, embodied as these menial workers in gargantuan factories. There's a fascinating blend of pitch-black cynicism present in embodying a cancer cell, knowing that they will result in the death of their host, but also a sort of juvenile whimsy in the act of giving such an organism a personality and a face. It's like a C.S. Lewis story set in the backdrop of a Clive Barker fever dream, a really strong example of intentionally mismatched ideas blending together sublimely. There are actual objectives to each realm. You aren't just mindlessly exploring each area simply for the sake of exploring. There's always some kind of authority figure who needs to die, if they aren't already asking for it, which funnels us into the simplistic puzzles required to do so. Each location has several brief branching paths that lead to some kind of switch to flip or item to grab to complete the task, which usually ends with a decapitation or general squashing of the skull of whatever factory lead or queen or alien creature that needs to die. The death of these creatures leads to the production of something called an egg of the earth, which we throw into some kind of pit that I think is by our home? We can explore our lonely abode on the home screen, which we steadily progress as we collect hidden keys throughout the locations, which can prove troublesome because as far as I know, they are missable because locations seem to vanish after completing the main objective, so tread lightly. There are also these locations that pop up randomly, dubbed transient, ephemeral, and apparent for each layer you're on. They are extremely small and exist to break up what little monotony is present, which is a welcome addition that allows you to purvey a minuscule example of ideas, like our primal natural instincts present in people represented by these disembodied squawking bird heads, or like whatever the hell the library is supposed to be. As I've mentioned, this is a dungeon crawler, which was a weirdly common genre for all the games in consideration for the video, but an especially puzzling one. Not because the locations are labyrinthian or confusing, but because our movement system is downright baffling in its ineffectiveness. First-person dungeon crawlers are something I've steadily been collecting and playing, and Psychopomp is one of the clunkiest I've ever played. I have to question if the protagonist is asthmatic or not, because your base walking speed and even your 5-second sprint are woefully unprepared to tackle the bite-sized dungeons prepared for us. It's honestly ridiculous, and I feel like I'm missing something here where I'm somehow walking wrong. Why are we so damn slow? My wrist got cramped with how many times I tried to mash this incredibly limited sprint key to desperately try and eke forward just a tiny bit faster. WASD to move around and Q and E to strafe while facing the same direction, which is pretty standard affair for a lot of these games, but something about the maps just don't feel natural with this control style. It's difficult to explain without anyone having a tactile feel for how this game controls on the dimensional planes, and the closest way I can describe to you it is like walking through a retro source map with PS1 dungeon controls, if that makes any sense whatsoever. It works entirely adequately for the wider areas, but the actual dungeons feel very uncomfortable to navigate without feeling at least a little bit nauseous. This was easily the most frustrating aspect of the game. It made what should have been an expertly crafted dungeon crawler an occasionally frustrating chore. We can use more than just our feet to navigate these worlds. Sight allows us to gain some commentary on our surroundings and NPCs, our voice allows us to engage in confusing but charming conversations, which are usually just pleas of factory workers wanting to die, and touch allows us to do exactly that. 4 is a hammer, because Psychopomp adheres to the kill it with hammers philosophy to a hilarious degree. Every non-required NPC can be slaughtered with our hammer, and we can access secret passages within the walls by slamming it against bleeding walls. The hammer is a crucial item because I'm pretty sure it is required to murder NPCs to get some of their items. And I love killing with people with hammers as much as the next guy, but the combat is really something to behold. I use combat extremely lightly here. You get one basic swing with a ton of end lag, which is not an issue whatsoever as a tool for exploration and player expression, but the combat asks you to precisely hit running foes, which is a brutal task given its sloth. The only real strategy is to back up and swing carefully, which will dispatch most enemies within 3-4 hits. But if you lose any encounter when your health turns 0, you have to restart the entire level, which is a compounding issue that only gets more frustrating the longer the levels get, the more you play. I think combat was honestly just a mistake to include. There aren't any other mechanics or strategies that I know of other than just being really careful and always having your hammer out, because all of these guys just materialize from the void and groan in your face at specific scripted encounters. There are health vials that restore health, but I strongly recommend you do not use any of these whatsoever and hoard them to the very last dungeon, because it's 2 to 3 times longer than every other dungeon, so having to restart that because of the clunky combat system feels unearned and kinda dreadful. There's no reasonable way to take a health vial during combat, so every encounter has a chance to be fatal, which does increase the feeling of tension you probably already felt, but in a way that makes you want to throw up rather than keep you on your toes. It's very odd. Dungeon crawlers with non-turn-based combat have been around for a long time. It's like an incredibly sluggish version of a Kingsfield combat where you can't switch from your default weapon. It's just tedious and a lesson in irritation that I think probably could have been entirely omitted to the overall product's benefit. There's an inventory grid system, but it's mostly there for show. It holds whatever respective items you need to solve a puzzle and whatever health vials you have. The menu system feels incredibly janky in a very we started working on this game in the late 90s but it came out in 2002 kind of way, like an Ion Storm game. Looking, speaking, touching, and hammering all have a hotkey, but as far as I know, not your inventory. You have to awkwardly drag keys out of the inventory and wait for the menu to slide down to use it. And I swear double pressing the health files only works when it feels like it. It's the stagnant movement and tiresome combat that slanted which areas I enjoyed exploring and ones I didn't. The Children's Hospital and the DNA Factory were far and away my favorite areas for their comfortable map design and much more relaxed combat encounters, while the school was a seriously miserable experience that saw me die multiple times because of the wildly teeth-grinding pillar segment and bum rushing that felt intense for such a severely restricted systems in a beginning level. One thing you can always count on is the masterstroke of ambience and atmosphere in every location. I make it no secret that I love ambient music and lonely locales. It's the basis for almost every game I cover on the channel. Dark ambience is something I would never play outside of my own headset, but I'm delighted to announce that Psychopop's soundtrack is nothing short of exceptional, something I can clearly broadcast by playing without my commentary. I am a sucker for unique UI, and Psychopomp passes that with flying colors. The helmet you wear displays your health and stamina bar, your interaction options in a convenient little mirror. I know minimal UIs are all the rage, but I propose the alternative, intentionally intrusive UIs that take up at least a quarter of the screen. There is a story present with these crazy catacombs, but it reaches a level of too deep 5 view that even I tremble at. Let's start with our main protagonist. Many men are inclined to get one look at her and say, wife material, but there is more to her than meets the many eyes that occupy the alien environments. Have you ever just seen someone on the street and wondered, how did you end up like this? That's her. How did she become so paranoid and unhinged? What is she using these earth eggs for? None of the dialogue she has to say really explains this or anything at all, but we have to clue in these by exploring optional locations and reading scattered notes. Firstly, the game does not appear to take place on Earth, because we can see Earth throughout the game, but there's also a note that details a phenomenon where the Earth apparently lost a significant part of its mass, now resembling a moon more than a planet. Where exactly are we? Looks like some kind of blend of a physical location mixed with our protagonist's delusions. But recall how the intro stated that the world we explore has always been here? Could just be another delusion, but many of these notes and locations appear pretty coherent. Like this museum that details the history of how humans went extinct, which was followed by the Thraits becoming extinct, which isn't actually true, but their numbers are so small they might as well be extinct. And the next species? There exists a pair of beings called the Queen of Venus and the King of Mercury, and what little we do know about the Queen is that she has a lot of spiritual connections to dragonflies, and she loves hammers. So there's really only one candidate. We play as this Queen of Venus. What happened to Mercury? Don't worry about it. Our journey becomes a sort of demented creation myth, what with playing as a goddess of sorts collecting embryos to create the Earth. Whatever those eggs are supposed to do. Did that helmet turn her crazy, or was she simply psychotic from the start? There are few in the way of answers, but a lot to sink your teeth into, and the ending, which I will abstain from spoiling in its entirety, raises a lot of questions that you really need to experience for yourself. Who exactly is the titular Psychopomp? Well, it's the helmet, if we're being literal, but Venus, or whatever her name is the player's Psychopomp, guiding us through this nightmare world. My playtime lasted around 3.5 hours, and none of what I described for this narrative was even remotely comprehensible to me without this exceptional Steam walkthrough written by Lalka, which really put everything together. I expected whatever bits of a narrative we would receive would be eclectic and all over the place, given the mental state of our main character, but I think there is such a thing as being too out of the way, where some of the details are either so obscure or so abstract that connecting them feels like something that requires far more time than is reasonably available to spend in-game, or ripe for a game theory, provided they have enough room to squeeze it in between all the mascot horror. There's a real old world feeling to this game, right down to its name. The gold portion is there because this is actually a fully realized version of the original Psychopomp game, which was released in January 2024, while this game was released in October of the same year. As a dungeon crawler, this was honestly severely lacking. Extremely clunky combat, rudimentary movement, and it feels kind of bothersome to explore for those reasons. It is kind of a shame because I think Psychopomp is one of the strongest examples of Yume Nikki inspiration I've ever seen. Something about the way you're given so much freedom to explore, interact with, and even kill inhabitants casually matches that unrestrained energy and dreamworld travel Kikiyama was able to draft back in the 2000s. The home area especially. Psychopomp has an incredibly inspired vision, and I don't think I've played or seen another game that embodies this kind of paranoid, delusional vibe quite like this, downright to its very bones. Every location, item, lore tidbit, it also feeds brilliantly into this unhinged worldview. The game was created by Fading Club, which is entirely operated by one man, Fin Tanguay, aka Carbonic. Psychopomp becomes a much more impressive showcase when you realize that Carbonic did everything himself. Game design, music composition, 3D modeling, everything. I have an immense amount of adoration for one-man teams, and Carbonic proves himself to be quite the game developer polymath, with some seriously impressive multi-reaching ability. Being able to compose a soundtrack of this caliber is already worth of praise, but every aspect, even those I feel are somewhat lacking, come together to make something I can highly recommend to any fan of indie dungeon crawlers and surreal exploration games, so long as you can stomach the awkward controls. It's a vibe-based experience, really. Since I've already mentioned it, Yume Nikki and other inspired RPG Maker games are the easiest point of recommendation for this one, but I can also see how a fan of early FromSoft dungeon crawlers like Kingsfield and Shadow Tower would enjoy this as well. If you enjoy the raw aura and misery of Baroque on the Sega Saturn, then Psychopomp is for you. As for you as it could possibly be. Psychopomp has enjoyed a modest cult following on more artistically minded websites like Tumblr, but a significant portion of the fan base is Russian, which is not entirely surprising given the content featured. Eastern Europeans love really morbid PC games. That's just how it works. I haven't even mentioned the phone mechanic, have I?
I'm over here stroking my dick. I got lotion on my dick right now. I'm just stroking my shit. I'm horny as fuck, man. I'm a freak, man. Like, for real.
Psychopomp Gold is available on Steam and itch.io for around $11-12, which is more than a fair asking price. A sequel was, hinted at, to put it lightly, so keep your ears peeled for the Psychopomp song. What comes to mind when you see this screenshot? Adult Swim shows from the early 2000s? Big Les? MS Paint drawings you made when you were a child? Cape Hideous does the impossible and brings all of these to life with its spellbinding art style, one of the most unique styles I've ever laid eyes on. We've all been told not to judge a book by its cover, but sometimes that cover is just really, really accurate. How else am I supposed to interpret this? Something that you will consistently see throughout this video's runtime is incredibly varied and unique visuals, which comes with the freedom of a single person or team being able to create whatever they want without a publisher or investor breathing down their back, to make the game marketable and toss it in a pile of Unreal Engine homogenized sludge with the rest. Cape Hideous rejects all of this and embraces its decadently hideous art style with every onion-litten breath. I think most people kind of understand what I meant by MS Paint art style, but analyzing the specifics of such a phrase reveals the amount of work and focus and attention to detail that went into making the work as splendid as it is. Microsoft Paint, being a standard program included in most Windows machines for years, naturally has an extremely low barrier to entry, that being free, which earned it its reputation for being the program of choice for children and those without much artistic talent. MS Paint doesn't have much past the absolute bare minimum of said tools, so most images drawn with this software are going to look quite crude, which turned into something people celebrated rather than mocked or ignored. Even if someone isn't a skilled artist, people still look at the software's output with a sense of nostalgia and unburdened glee. There's a difference in being unable to draw and having an intentionally ugly art style, and what artist and game developer Jake Clover has is a thorough understanding of the medium he's working in, so much so that it's almost indistinguishable. Cape Hideous cherishes all these little idiosyncrasies by doing its best to replicate them in such a loving, appreciative way. The complete lack of shading, extremely limited color palette, total disregard for pixel art conventions, the circle tool heads, it all fits together neatly to bring this style to life, but its exceptionally smooth animation is what ties everything together and keeps the ship afloat. Pun not intended. Everything from your character's walking cycle to the clouds in the background to your hair and clothing parting in the wind is a masterful affair of animation that must have taken ages to complete. Take this section here where you must climb up a ship's mast to roll up some flags. The breeze is so strong that everyone's clothing bellows in the breeze, and our main character's long hair is either flung out as far as possible or directly covers their face depending on which direction they're facing. It's a seriously impressive showcase for this oddball graphical style. The NPCs in the background are just as alive as we are. Their movements feel natural and casual, despite how freakish they end up looking close up. They sit around smoking, lifting heavy objects. There's even this weirdly long scene of a guy sharpening our knife that lasts longer than any other cutscene in the game. The idle animations are charming, as they are impressive. You end up performing different actions depending on location, so I stood still in every new area and I entered to see what our main heroine does, which either involves idly messing with her hair or playing with whatever new item she's obtained, or pointing out something in the background foliage. Our appearance changes the more we play, which makes our brief journey feel ever more immersive as we complete our task and set out to sail. Visuals aren't everything. How do we actually play this game? I'm somewhat hesitant to call it a graphical adventure because our only way to interact with the game is by using the arrow keys on your keyboard. There is no dedicated interaction button. That feature is tied to proximity with NPCs and objects in the world, so if you need to speak to someone, you just walk right up in their face and a scene plays out for you. Cape Hideous has no spoken or written dialogue, no instructions or background. Just you and the pirate ship you're a part of. You're given almost complete freedom to explore this unnamed ship by walking to the left, right, and occasionally up and down ladders. Our objective is never stated, but it's something you will definitely just stumble onto that makes you go, oh, so that's what we're doing. We first have to obtain our knife by walking into it, then exploring the world's largest and most haphazardly constructed ship mast to roll up and pack all of our flags by means of cutting the ropes or having them printed out for us. All of our tasks work kind of like this. You just walk around and gradually gain access to areas that were previously blocked off and navigate them at our leisure. Every character you run into is some kind of freak of nature with a smoking and drinking problem that is slowly dying from dysentery and scurvy, but there's a sense of real camaraderie and companionship on this ship. Can't believe I actually wrote that, wow. People will help you with a task, or move out of the way to let you do it, or sometimes require you to do something for them, which is often just bringing them an item 2 screens away. It's never a complicated affair, but it does a lot of legwork to sell the fact we're pirates on some kind of mutual interest journey. That mutual interest journey being sailing into a maelstrom of monstrously dark clouds that is shockingly evocative for such a primitive art style. Everyone being mute also communicates that everyone aboard is completely on the same wavelength. They all understand each other and form an implicit bond without words. There aren't really puzzles in this game either. You more just wander from place to place and things happen around you, which you would assume to become stale almost instantly. But Cape Hideous skirts that accusation by having each of your tasks be something incredibly mundane solved by something arcane. Like this example here, the basement of the ship is letting in seawater, so naturally we need to drink some kind of hallucinogen, trip balls, and then we can fix the machine to let out the water. The hallucinations take the form of these extremely brief octopus sections where we navigate some mazes, and they were a real low point of the game. There are 2 sections like these, and they feel like total pace breakers without anything exciting or interesting happening in these little mazes. Wait a minute. Pirate crew full of mutes with hallucinogenic drinks and squid symbolism? Are we on Euron Greyjoy's ship? The tone never fails to revel in its own frivolity and pure childlike wonder, which is such a breath of fresh air. You guide yourself to each scene at whatever pace you feel to explore the ship top to bottom. Literally. Despite the crazy characters, it doesn't feel too outlandish for a pirate crew. Even when you see a collection of bones hanging out in that giant mast, he's still decked out in a pirate hat. It feels like there was something I can loosely describe as careful consideration, not to include something too absurd or too silly that would break your focus. I've got to get something off my chest. Our main character is adorable. I loved seeing her hair in the wind and having her awkwardly crane her neck at everybody else on the crew, who are like twice her size. She's definitely a smoker, but she is a cutie patootie. Anyone who's played this game can attest to its excellent soundtrack, courtesy of one Magic Dweedu, who is an indie dev in his own right, making all those nightmarish games Vinny Vinesauce plays once a month. The Steam description describes the soundtrack as shifting the fibers of the soul, which is actually a pretty accurate description. The dauntless feel of adventure in summer mornings is more than just present, it's completely bewitching. Careful use of string instruments in each of the ship's locations makes this short journey that much more memorable. And when I say short, I mean preposterously short. Cape Hideous's biggest flaw in my eyes is that it is barely 30 minutes long, which makes its run dangerously close to being a paid tech demo more than a full-fledged game. It's $7, so hardly a price point worth getting too upset over, but it's still something to consider. I've been oddly quiet about the people who made this game, and that's for good reason. This game's developer goes by a couple different names online, but the one I'm calling him is Jay Clover. The name probably won't sound familiar to you unless you're really deep into the obscure indie dev scene, because Clover's games are some of the most esoteric and out there I've ever seen. He has the tendency to shift between art styles drastically, seemingly losing interest between releases. His Game Jolt page is a complete mess in the best way possible. Not one thing looks alike. If Carbonic was an educated, astute creator refined in the arts and Godot, Clover is a guy in a shed welding things together out of pure passion, and possibly heroin. Both loose styles, as I roughly define them, have their place in the grand scheme of indie gaming, and it entirely depends on your preference which one you're interested in. It's kinda hard to find concrete information about Clover, other than the fact that he's Australian, which I totally predicted. Do all Australians just draw like this? But worry not, because he's constructed a retrospective on himself, titled exactly that in a video from a decade ago. Well, that's useful. Clover is an artist, first and foremost, doing whatever entertains him at that very moment, and I admire his creative process, as outlandish as it appears to be. He's no stranger to collaborating with other creators, and Cape Hideous is a joint venture between himself, the previously mentioned Magic Dweedu, and a Melbourne-based studio called Nonsense Machine publishing it. Clover has also collaborated with another indie dev named Jack King Spooner to create a couple games in the Sluggish Moors indie series, and this will not be the last time I'll mention Spooner. Believe me. My recommendation for Cape Hideous entirely depends on how you feel about the art style and the length. I'm conflicted on recommending the game to long-time or even casual fans of graphical adventure games because of its length and incredibly simplistic gameplay, but if you're looking for a visual feast more than an immersive gameplay experience, then Cape Hideous is for you. Any fan of Adult Swim or indie animation can easily find themselves having a magical time during their lunch break. Lunch break involving dragging your entire setup to the break room, but whatever. I'm sure the game works fine on the Steam Deck. I have to wonder what a more traditional graphic adventure would look like in this style, however. You'd probably have to have some kind of text to make this coherent or enjoyable for at least an hour, but an entire game animated like this with quirky dialogue options would be a strong contender for my game of the year. Cape Hideous and Jake Clover aren't interested in following any trends. They only care about self-expression, and that's what I admire about them the most. It's the beating heart at the center of indie projects, and ideally, we should all do our part to support them as best as we can. RPG Maker horror games. You can't escape these no matter how hard you try, not even in your nightmares. Titles like Yume Nikki and Ib really don't need much of an introduction. If you're watching the video, I'm sure you've played or at least have heard of these little indie titles that use the RPG Maker engine to craft a wonderfully unique and often surreal environment to explore and solve puzzles in. Many of these games have reached incredible heights and have become mainstays within the greater horror community despite the fact that anyone could make them, which has inspired countless people to throw their own hat in the ring. Everyone can name the heavy hitters like Aoni in Fear and Hunger, but there are an absurd amount of hidden gems stuck within Japanese forums and obscure corners of the internet that can get overshadowed by the big boys. So many of these have zero presence on the greater internet, and I just so happened to find one on Steam called Blood-Soaked. In the interest of not having my mouth washed out with soap, I think I'll just call him Blood-Soaked Brother for now. If the title wasn't enough of an indicator, then take a look at the design of our main character, the titular Brother. Blood-Soaked is a cruel, crude, and completely shameless RPG Maker title deeply entrenched in a vile dark fantasy aesthetic, stained with bowels and entrails. We're told quite simply that we are something called a Blood Knight, a monstrous corruption of a normally chivalrous position dedicated to hunting monsters and taking what you please, which makes the sign of you loathed, reviled, and feared. Our appearance nails the exact kind of depraved, violent aesthetic the game is going for. Our armor is bolted together haphazardly, the red color hiding the constant blood that stains it. One baneful eye peeks out to read notes and hunt monsters, including a goblin that we run into on the road that begs for its life before you mercilessly cut it down. I don't believe our hub town we get to explore even has a name, but it's not like the people living there will tell us. They're terrified, and if people want to talk to us, then we should be the ones who are scared. Everyone here is either a starved, paranoid peasant or someone deeply unpleasant, like a slave trader or some kind of unspecified magician who needs your talents for some dark purpose. Our world is ugly and filthy and violent, and that's seen even in the combat. The blood theme goes even further than space funerals somehow, by making it a part of active combat. All of your main skills are blood-related somehow. I'm kind of picturing it like Scarlet in Mortal Kombat. We can even pick up some basic party members, like a freakish elf who makes suspicious stews that act as our healer, this kind of homunculus creature stuck inside of a cage that has been cursed with immortality, so potent his magic involves healing himself and only himself, and I think you can recruit that slave later on. The foes you have to face are grotesque and quasi-human-looking ghouls and homunculi and various other pale bodies smushed and starving together. They're just conscious enough to beg for their lives as you slice them down. The combat is unfortunately where this game falls down hard on its face. RPG Maker's default assets can feel extremely plain because the vast majority of games published on the engine use the default assets, either because the creator of the game chose to make something very small scale and chose not to alter the combat because it was just a fun project made for their own amusement or experience, or the game just doesn't feature combat at all, or they just didn't care to change anything. Blood-Soaked is nestled more towards the former, and without a doubt it suffers because of that. It's almost entirely unchanged from the default combat settings, which means you will see the most basic of magical spells and items mixed in with stock animations and sound effects. There is some attempt at making a difference with status effects, but maybe I'm just an idiot and missed some kind of obvious clues, but it's really hard to keep track of what status you have. There are some ones you'd expect, like poison, but staggering was something I don't think I fully understood. It's borderline Pokemon Red and Blue tier, where staggering your enemy prevents them from performing any actions and happens incredibly frequently to the point where abusing it is something I would highly recommend if I knew how to activate it past sheer luck. I won't say there's no originality, because that's simply not the case. I've mentioned how blood is the magic in this game, and it's gained by hitting foes with regular attacks or getting hit yourself. The more blood you have, the better magic you can cast depending on the character. You can construct arrows out of blood or generally ensnare others in unpleasant hemorrhages, and he can even do some friendly fire to increase other people's blood meters, which is pretty funny because he's just slashing them to increase blood. He's just making them bleed out. Shout out to having battle backgrounds. Those are always a nice inclusion, even if they're kind of inconsistent. The biggest, most glaring complaint I have is entirely aesthetic-wise. Almost all of the sound effects and attack animations are the default ones. I'm harshly critical on people using default assets because it's already hard enough to stand out as it is in the RPG Maker crowd, and a lot of people are going to assume those defaults are there because you just didn't care about the project that much, but I'll at least cut some slack on the animations. Those seem really annoying to put together. I love foliage and sound design and all those little bells and whistles, and all of these stock effects just don't fit the mood of the game whatsoever. A game like this should have the sounds of rusted metal scraping, shrieks, gushing blood, and splitting howls of war cries constantly following it, but instead we get generic anime sound effects that I used in my long-hidden RPG Maker projects from the VX Ace days when I was 12. However, the OST proper is quite enjoyable and oddly soothing. It was composed by Adam Bray, hope I'm pronouncing that right, who brings very simple but effective strumming to the table with a guitar, adding a quiet, moody vibe to such a vicious and loud world. Take a listen. Another point of praise for the combat is that the major encounters almost always feature an animated scene of violence. We can see our characters or NPCs in the world slaughter each other like cattle, crudely animated in a way that gives it splendidly vicious detail. It really makes you feel like you've earned a story moment or boss fight climax when you get to see its throat slit. I don't want to portray the game as being entirely one-dimensional, or having no extra depth than just a dark fantasy aesthetic, because there are some external details to bother about here. Despite his job, there still exists a small kernel of genuine hope within him. He vaguely remembers a woman, someone he can't really recall much about, but something about her inspires him to continue on and not just give up and die. He wants to be a part of this world and contribute, I guess you can call it, with a million little asterisks over it. There is more story depth to it, and it is actually quite nice, a little bit unexpected for the kind of game it is, but I think I'll keep that a secret. This one is so obscure, you might just want to play it yourself, and it's $2, it really wouldn't hurt. What really drew me into this project is that it isn't trying to change the genre or even go trending, it's just a low-stakes project made by someone who was in college who wanted to make the game for fun, and I admire that the developer was just willing willing to rush out the gate with that. Game development doesn't have to be a certain way or achieve the same goals. It was made for fun as a passion project, which I have a ton of respect for. The developer is someone named Killmind Creator, a very fitting name who hasn't done much else past Bloodsoaked as far as I know. They aren't very online by this moniker, mostly posting Warhammer paints, which make a lot of sense as to why the game looks like this in retrospect, but it's not like they need a super online presence. It's incredibly interesting that so far we've got a professor with a LinkedIn page, an indie artist, and a guy who goes to college who made a game because he thought it would be fun. I'm not ranking or judging any of these people's choices or places in life or decisions. I just wanted to collect different creative types to compare and contrast because the world of indie games is so vibrant, and we're not even halfway through this video. I know many people are going to accuse this game as being some kind of Fear and Hunger clone, but to be honest, I like playing this game more than Fear and Hunger. Fear and Hunger makes me very mad sometimes because it's intentionally frustrating. There is enough to distinguish it. Just because they're both very dark fantasy and gruesome, they're not the same thing. Bloodsoaked is much more Warhammer than I understood, even though I don't play much Warhammer. You know what I mean. Go check the game out, it's pretty fun. It was a lot of grinding though. It was very slow, the combat wasn't great, so I kinda had to just put the game down. Maybe if things went a bit smoother, I'd have more of a review, but oh well. In one of my videos, I think I implied that I never browsed itch.io for indie games and made a lot of people upset with my apparent Steam favoritism. And I want to clarify that I do like itch as a platform for finding fun games, I just feel there's a lot more garbage on there comparatively. A ton of the games on there are free, so the spectrum of what can be considered hidden gems too edgy for Steam to Unity projects not worth your time is quite vast. But it's that exact range that allows the platform to host a ton of very conceptual and abstract games that might not be as digestible to a mainstream audience. They lack a satisfying point, if you catch my drift. Some of these are only for brothers and sisters who enjoy the niche experimental side of gaming. I've spent many drunken hours in the dusk scrolling through the endless landscape of half-finished projects, and I happened to find one that stuck out to me by name alone: Museum of the Saved Image. Virtual museum tours, both the mundane and the fantastical, are nothing new in video games, but the premise of this one is what got me hooked. This is a gallery that I created to house the images that I had on my desktop last year. I needed to get rid of the clutter, but there was something about the images as a collection that I wanted to preserve before they were scattered again to the digital winds. I made a majority of these 1 year ago, put it away, and took it back out recently to wrap it up. While it's definitely personal, I hope that something can reach through without any more context than what's given. Someone pasting their backlog of images from their computer for us to tour within a virtual museum of sorts isn't really a game in the traditional sense, but aims to use the medium as an art project, not an uncommon thing in this day and age. There aren't any win conditions, the game doesn't care if you make it to the end or see all there is to see, it exists simply because its creator felt the need to create and share it. It's for that reason that its presentation is as bare bones as possible, as to not impede the only purpose of this game, viewing floating images from the creator's computer. The controls are WASD, hold shift to sprint, space to jump, and R to put you back at the start. The primitive controls aren't a problem for this reason, even if the camera likes to jitter more than it probably should. My immediate expectation of this museum was that each wing or section would have a dedicated theme or motif, but I was only partially right. There are rooms like the Lemon Room, full of photoshopped and drawn lemons, but consistency isn't the focus here. When I say you'll find anything in this museum, I do mean anything. Stock photos, random emails, direct messages, screenshots of anime, drawings, photos of animals and people, dabbing, art projects. It's a chaotic nightmare simply to gaze upon it, let alone apply any sense to it. That isn't to say the museum itself isn't just as much of a spectacle to gaze at. Some of these images float in the air, while others are attached to walls or billboards. Stretched images are used for this game's textures and apply a generous layer of surrealism to our surroundings, making our tour a touch unnerving. I spent a ton of time gazing at this 3D model of a giant cat. The rooms are vast as they are densely populated. Rudimentary decorations can imply a forest or space location. Your methods of traversal involve going through false walls or falling down pits. You never ever progress by walking in a straight line, which naturally encourages exploration, which leads you to find more saved images. There's one single music track that loops endlessly throughout the entire game, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't the least bit scary. Lend me your ear for a moment. It only takes around 30 minutes to see absolutely everything and make it to the end, where our only reward is the knowledge of how much this game's creator likes lemons and Lane. But is that really it? I know more than a few of you squinted at my footage and suspected that there's probably something deeper happening. Some kind of hidden theme or something I've been keeping secret, and you'd be right. I have been. None of these images are given any context, naturally, but there is a very scant and illuminating paragraph at the very start of the game we can read that's as close as we're going to get for an explanation as to what's going on. Onasi Malak, an individual spotted throughout the images in multiple conversations. The girl appeared during an online LARP the artist held and began to message the artist and their other friends. A mysterious person who wasn't afraid to ask strangers deep questions. Interactions with Malak have an otherworldly quality to them, perhaps why the artist sought to record so many of them. Malak's messages and Facebook status updates are everywhere and feature mundane memes or surprisingly deep personal conversations. The only explanation for this game besides the one on itch is that the artist was clearly obsessed with speaking with this character, and the two seemed quite close, so much so that the song that played within the game is something she made herself. This completely changed how I viewed the game. We might feel like a creepy voyeur to be reading DMs between this game's creator and this girl, but that's the whole point. The player is observing a vertical slice of their life and trying to apply some sense to it, much like all the images featured themselves. Of course, the question of the significance of us trying to apply a motive or sense to the obsession with this character is more than likely the entire point of the game, but from the way I was viewing it, there's far more going on past just this game's creator was sliding in this chick's DMs, even if that's almost definitely what was going on. Going through the images once more, I started to notice patterns in the recurring themes of internet relationships and social isolation. Most of these anime screenshots are from Serial Experimental Lane, which is quite possibly the most iconic story centered around those themes in tandem. There are several photos of people meeting in real life, but the birth of the Malak connection was online, and a majority of these images featuring her are screenshots of DMs and social media, so it's clearly skewed in that direction. This specific image of a chat prompt to Cleverbot where the user hugs her gives off an incredibly lonely vibe that left me staring at my screen in the wee hours of the morning more than I'd like to admit. So is this game entirely about internet friendships? Well, it would certainly be relatable if it was. I think people have a lot more internet friends than they do real ones, and I can probably prove it right now. Did you check if you got a message on Discord? Because that was me, not you. In that split second, what were you expecting, or even hoping for? Was it a message from your D&D group that they're all ready to go this upcoming Friday? Was it a bit of interpersonal drama in a server of people that's inevitably going to lead to an awkward situation? Or was it perhaps something a bit more private, a DM from someone you're interested in? When I was reading some of these deep connections between Malak and the game's creator, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking of specific people in my life. I'm not ashamed to say that I've spent a non-insignificant amount of time online. How could I not? I'm a Zoomer, I'm 24 years old. I've been using Discord on and off since I was a teenager, and Skype before that. I've met some wonderful people there, some who've been exceptional friends which have had a positive effect on me and my life, and I know nearly everyone watching this can relate. Reading these messages with this horrifying audio playing and reflecting on my life made me realize how much time I've spent doing it. And it hasn't been an entirely positive reflection. I think that I should have, been a better friend to a lot of people. I think I flew off the handle and said and did things I shouldn't have a lot. And some of these left scars for others, and myself. All throughout this playthrough I was yearning to try and match the connection the artist had with Malak with similar connections I've made in my life. I formed most of these as a younger man, but anyone who's been that age will tell you that your late teens to early 20s is when people are figuring out their lives and what they want from it. And you usually end up losing more people than gaining them in that period. Things don't always end abruptly or with hurt feelings on both sides. Sometimes people just move on, or don't see eye to eye. But online it's hard to communicate that, to be earnest and vulnerable. Sometimes what's special for you is nothing more than an inconvenience for the other. People can grow apart right next to each other, and realize that the person they knew and cared about for years has been gone for a long time, and they've been attached to memories and broad feelings. Sometimes it's no one's fault but time and the unpredictable causality of human life. Sometimes it can be your fault, or the other person's fault, and sometimes people just die. Sometimes you're left in the wreckage of something that once meant everything to you and can't figure out which broken pieces are yours or the other person's. And sometimes whatever you're able to reassemble sickens you so much you destroy it yourself just to reclaim some sense of control and worthwhileness. People fall together, and people fall apart. It's a reality that none of us could escape from, and won't stop until the end of the human race. It's happened since Adam and Eve, and it will happen to you. And if you have any, it'll happen to your children. Because no human connection is sacred enough to resist. I bought a ring on the day when I experienced something like that. Whenever I wear it, all I can feel is lingering remorse and guilt and shame. I don't particularly like this ring anymore, but until that ghost leaves me, it's not going anywhere. Besides, it's green, and green's always been my color. Is that what Museum of the Saved Image is about? I can't say for sure. Perhaps all of this waxing I just did was merely a reflection on the self, and any intentional messaging on the game's part is something I've just dreamt up. But that in itself is what I believe to be this game's magnum opus, biggest strength, and its intention. Trying to apply sense to something is all you can really do. It's human nature, and that's what we're supposed to do here. How much of what I said in my rant was even truthful? How do you know I'm not just lying to you? You don't. You can never 100% understand someone in their totality, even if they're telling the truth, because truth is hard to separate from an in-the-moment feeling that can drift away the next morning. If you play this game, you won't have the exact same story and report as me. Everyone can find something different to appreciate in this title in a small way. It doesn't matter if it's something profound and relatable from your own life, or you just like the giant cat. A core, inescapable part of the human experience is portrayed vividly in such a simple game, and that's what made it special for me. Whatever happened to Malak? I have no idea, and maybe the creator doesn't even know. The creator of this game is named Flan, and they've made plenty of other games on itch prior and after, so go show them some love and become existential from touring their museum. As a game, it's not really fun, but fun wasn't really the point. The point I'm referring to is something you have to discover on your own, and sometimes it's not always enjoyable. Have you ever heard of a lost anime called Saki Sanobashi? It's perhaps the most coveted piece of supposedly lost anime of all time in the English-speaking world, which started one of the most intense and dedicated lost media hunts to boot. As far as I know, the rumors of this gruesome work started on 4chan's X-board, with a user trying to find a piece he described as a 1980s-looking anime about a group of high school girls locked in a bathroom who slowly kill themselves and each other. He didn't have an exact name or date, he can only recall scant details about the work, but people began to attach the names Saki Sanobashi and Go for a Punch to the title and set off to find this supposed piece of lost anime. Over a decade of searching later, people are still left completely empty-handed, despite the vigilance and dedication of lost media hunters, who are some of the most passionate hobbyists I've ever seen in my life. Some of these guys don't play about their lost baby shows, man. The premise, despite being gruesome, is more than believable, especially if it were some obscure doujin work distributed through extremely limited means decades ago. This could easily exist. Countless OVAs have been propped up as a potential candidate, but none have stuck. Do I think Saki Sanobashi exists? Honestly, not really. The fact this whole odyssey spun out from /X is reason enough to be highly suspicious of its authenticity, because nothing good goes on in there. People can't decide on if the original OP simply misremembered a bunch of details cobbled from different sources, or flat out made the whole thing up. But with no concrete evidence, people start tilting at windmills and running wild with the concept. Artists and writers alike simply made their own interpretations and versions of the story to fill the void. Some chose to stick to the limited details of the original, or just went completely nutty with the concept and did their own thing. I'm quite enamored with browsing art for all of this. It's really enjoyable to see how much a macabre plot can be extrapolated upon and create different versions all over the net. Even if it does muddy the search attempts by throwing in details that weren't originally specified. But my absolute favorite of these interpretations for this mythical lost anime is actually a visual novel that uses its name and concept to make something particularly spellbinding. I've alluded to it a couple times, but I'm a big fan of visual novels, from the extravagant Spike Chunsoft releases to the independent. Software like Ren'Py allows anyone to create a very simple visual novel right out of the gate, and Saki Sanobashi uses it to competent effect. What it lacks in presentation, it makes up for splendidly with a gorgeous art style that kept me hooked from beginning to end. Backgrounds are rendered in this watercolor style with muted shades to communicate the unfortunate situation our four main characters are in, hopelessly stuck in the girl's bathroom. The designs themselves are incredibly distinctive. No two characters look alike. They have completely different proportions, body language, hairstyles, and features to separate them. I'm really in love with the character designs. Despite their sallow skin and oddly proportioned faces, they still look very cutesy in a very odd way. I don't think it entirely captures the 80s to 90s anime look the game's description was implying, but it stands out enough in a very haunted VHS tape way that scratches my brain just right. The Ren'Py default UI structure is still there, but decorated with flowery fonts and text boxes to not feel too stale. But what really kicks off this game is the story. We start on a computer browsing 4chan, and seeing an Anon express how miserable they are with their life. Through a private DM, we agree to link up somewhere to end our lives together, which leads our player character and 4 high school girls into a secluded public bathroom as our final resting place. Unfortunately, our player character is an idiot and forgot all the chemicals needed to do the deed in their cars, so we have to leave the ladies and go fetch them from the trunk. But the girls quickly notice that we've been gone far too long, and now they're locked in the bathroom, starting off the game properly. Our protagonist, as you might expect, is Saki Sanobashi, an incredibly sketchy figure whose motives for ending her own life are as ambiguous as they are suspicious. Each girl has a reason for wanting to end their lives, but Saki is hesitant to explain herself, and by that I mean she says jack about it. Other characters even doubt she's Japanese. Something is just clearly off about her. The character dynamics are explored the more the days pass as the girls wait for us to come back, or wait for starvation to claim them. Either or works. There's the bookish and meek Hana, the rambunctious tomboy Kimiko, and the soft-spoken and mild-mannered Sayuri. Much of the dialogue that makes up this game is the girls explaining themselves and their motivations to each other over time. Kimiko has a poor relationship with her family and feels completely overwhelmed with the pressure for her to become a tennis star, despite her exceptional ability in the sport. Sayuri was born visually impaired, which led to her loving family sacrificing a ton of money to give her a happy life, which has caused her an immense amount of guilt that haunts her. And Hana doesn't speak much. Gameplay consists of exploring the incredibly limited bathroom via different sections. The door to try and escape, the closet, stalls, mostly out of arbitrary ways for the girls to pass the time and wait for something to happen. Which sounds boring on paper, and some players felt the same, but there's always character dialogue that follows or persists when you do this, which can be skipped or elaborated on based on dialogue choices, so it's relatively painless. Ren'Py's liberal save system allows, if not outright encourages you to save scum on any of these conversations, so missing optional dialogue isn't much of a concern. I will say sometimes there is some odd sentence structures because the developer's mother tongue isn't English as far as I'm aware, where, but it's written well enough to be totally legible and descriptive, just with a few clunky sentences and the occasional bit of broken grammar here and there. The game's soundtrack is a curious case because there are a staggering 20 tracks featured within an incredibly brief visual novel, all of which implement a variety of instruments, like the piano or the French horn, but feel kind of busy, if that makes sense. There's enough variety featured in this OST to be well worth a separate listen, but I honestly feel like the ambient sounds are a far more suitable choice to dominate the game's atmosphere. I feel like I can hardly recall which tracks are played where in-game. They all kind of trip over each other to be featured in an individual scene, which means you'll hear like 2 minutes of each track as you read, which is nowhere near enough time to stick in your head. On the second night, we awake to find that Hannah has taken matters into her own hands and hung herself in a very odd way. At least Sayuri escaped that fate in this game. This forces the remaining 3 to realize that our player character isn't coming back, and that these are their last days. Kimiko brings up the topic of suicide notes, which Saki struggles to find the words for. Literally, she can't even come up with anything. The girls discuss potentially eating Hannah, but back out because the whole reason they came here was to die in the first place. Kind of seems counterintuitive, unless you really wanted to be a cannibal. Sayuri eventually decides that she's had enough and wants to go out from blood loss. I know I mentioned it prior, but seeing this girl explain that she wants to kill herself quietly in a random bathroom so her parents don't experience the shock of finding her corpse in their own home genuinely broke my heart to read. Now, Sayuri goes through with the deed no matter what. But remember our dialogue options. If we choose the right ones, we can actually participate and guide Sayuri into killing herself by pointing out which artery to cut open to die faster. What little we learn about Saki in these dialogue choices is that she is far more conniving and dark than she lets on, if not outright malicious and sadistic. If we go back to a previous save and choose the right options and visit the closet at a very specific time to pick up the noose Hannah would later use, which is not something I thought the game was able to do, and there's basically no indication you can pick it up, so it's not very well detailed, we can convince Hannah to hang herself that night, because Saki launches into a shockingly cruel rant against her for what seems like no reason whatsoever, making fun of her for having a good relationship with her father and being a bookworm. Need I remind you we met this girl on 4chan? My weak little heart felt so bad for this poor girl. What is your problem? Also, her ghost jump scares you with the stock scream sound effect for good measure. Saki becomes stranger when you experience the few dream sequences she has as she passes out on the floor between nights. A confessional booth, a hangman's noose being haunted by ghosts, all classic signs of guilt and self-loathing. No one told her she had to help kill these girls, so why she's doing something that clearly tears her up inside doesn't quite make sense, right? Right? Once Sayuri dies, we're taken back into the intro's computer screen and we have some files to sort through. Keep filming is in the Word doc, with photos of a dead Hannah, Sayuri, and the cut-up wrist from the intro are seen in the files. But the person attached to that wrist is given a name, Kyoko, who apparently played the victim. But peep the Steam achievement. Have an opinion on yourself, and look at the icon. So, Saki Sanobashi is a fake name, and our blondie protagonist is actually named Kyoko. But there's an extra force outside of the bathroom somehow able to obtain the dead girl's photos from unknown means. But if Kyoko, encourages and helps them to die, then it really narrows down what's happening here. We're still missing a photo of Kimiko, and we're put back in the bathroom, right in time to see Kimiko try and fail to drown herself in the sink. Possibly the most batty method of suicide I've ever seen depicted. How she managed to tie her own wrists like that is beyond me. Kimiko reveals that the reason she wants to die is that due to her being hit by a car, she can't practice tennis anymore, or any real physical exertion. Which is weird because how? Unless I missed something, she looked pretty non-car crash victimed, and even helps us try to force the door open. The accident storyline makes sense emotionally. The one thing she liked about herself has been taken away and given her a reason to end her life, but the reveal comes out of nowhere and doesn't feel especially compelling because we don't really see much foreshadowing or physical signs, or at least I didn't. When Sayuri's eyes are so stylized to communicate her visual impairment, Having Kimiko also be physically disabled in an invisible way feels a bit odd. Not that disabilities are strictly visual, it's just kind of a strange choice, and never really elaborated on or shown in a way that felt like it made sense to me or felt satisfying as a narrative conclusion. There's a rather infamous achievement involving you winning her heart by making a ton of correct dialogue choices that has her invite you shopping with a very implicit Yuri. Guess she got over that lady crush pretty quickly and decided to drown herself though. But before she does the deed, she gets in our face about her last words, and we actually have the opportunity to type them out ourselves. So naturally I used the capability to its fullest extent. The interactive sequence of Kimiko drowning is pretty cool. Instead of being remorseful or in shock, Saki feels quite proud that not only she outlived everyone, but got it all in recording, too. She declares this game over and awaits our player character to pick her up as the screen fades to black and the character's sprites change to reflect how everyone died in the title screen. But things quite aren't over yet. Any attempt to start a new game loads on a scene of our player character indeed returning to pick up Saki, and the title screen has her missing, leading to the actual ending of the game. So the true story of this game is that this young girl, Kyoko, who assumes the Saki Sanobashi name, is utterly consumed with self-loathing and apathy for her own life, resorting to self-harm and nihilism. Our player character is a devious freak who records and distributes images of young girls' suicides or murders if Saki helps them. The purpose for the distribution could be for our own sick engagement or some kind of snuff ring. It's left ambiguous. Saki seems completely willing to go along with our plans no matter what, and even gets a sick, pleasurable thrill from having a hand in ending the other girls' lives. Not a huge stretch to assume the player and Saki deliberately target already suicidal people to make their jobs easier. I surmise that Saki projects her own self-hatred by ending the lives of others, something she's afraid of doing herself. But this is also manifests as intense nightmares that fill her with guilt, her consciousness eating away at her as she does her dirty deeds. Whether Saki is a business or romantic partner to the player is irrelevant, because the two are key figures in a sickening industry that uses the internet to find vulnerable girls and takes advantage of them, which is such a strong way to gut punch the player. You are the bad guy. And if we want to get too deep for you and grasp at straws, this might even extend to a meta-narrative. Saki Sanobashi, the lost anime with the premise of high school girls trapped in a bathroom who begin to die, has never been found, but recall what the premise is. A lot of people are searching for an animation involving the mutilation and deaths of young women. Just as Kyoko takes on the name of Saki Sanobashi, someone that doesn't actually exist, the player character, us, forces the scenario of Saki Sanobashi to happen. We took the premise into our own hands and forced it to exist. It's kind of like a built-in reflection of how we want this disturbing piece to be real so bad, we'll make it happen on our own. The visual novel lacks a lot of the bloody violence and gore thought to be associated with the original anime and swaps it for a lot more emotional devastation, which I think was the right call. But that's not to say it isn't brutal to see people we could have considered friends in another life slumped over after feeling their lives are worthless. Also, check this, the game's creator made a plugin to actually display everyone's last words publicly on Twitter. Look, there I am. I also found the last words I wrote in 2024 when I played this for the first time. Funny how little things have changed. The reviews settle somewhere in the mostly positive valley, which is a shame, but understandable. I think people went into a Saki Sanobashi project expecting more bloodshed rather than a psychological drama. The story is also incredibly short, lasting 30-so minutes if you do everything in one run. And some of the minor details are a little puzzling, like, where did Saki hide a camera on her the entire time? Did she have one of those little Monokuma cameras? Despite its short length, the game always stuck with me. I'm positively smitten by the dank and cursed vibes, the characters, the morbid plot twist, even if it didn't land as hard for others. Really, my biggest problem with the game, outside of the achievements being kind of a pain in the ass to get, is how short it is. It doesn't overstay its welcome whatsoever, but 30 minutes is pretty damn short, even for a $5 release. Had this gotten some kind of sequel that kept the vibes and dug even deeper into the psychological turmoil of its cast, you would probably see it as a full, proper-length video on my channel. The game's creator is called Veritrum, and they've kept busy since the release of this novel in 2023, just a year after they created another visual novel called Harlot's Diary that deals with the dangerous life of a poor prostitute led in a world that's clearly out to get her. Once again, the art is the standout. It looks incredible. The game's definitely not everyone's cup of tea, but I liked it a whole lot. Visual novels are one of the most common types of indie games because of how accessible and free Ren'Py is, and the genre is mostly just art assets. So any hobbyist with a tablet can make a visual novel in their spare time, and believe me, that rabbit hole goes deep. Normally I start each segment with the games themselves, but I think I should introduce the man behind the curtain for this entry first, Jack King Spooner. I mentioned him during Jake Clover's segment on the Sluggish Moors series, but Spooner's work is extensive and dates back well over a decade ago. How do I even describe his work? Controversial, absurdism mixed with haunting sincerity, Scottish, all of the above, really. The best way I can put his catalog into words is by sharing an experience I had while playing one of his games, Dujana. The game is about a Palestinian woman's life after the death of her family, but you'd probably never guess by how it looks. Spooner employs some gracefully rugged claymation in most of his games that gives him a very rough but deliberate and thoughtful look. The most impactful moment of the game for me was riding in a giant robot mech suit throughout the desert, only to reach an area in the game involving an NPC making the argument that when someone finds out they are about to die, they become a different person because they view their memories in third person, essentially removing themselves out of the equation. That's the purest distillation of Spooner's games I can give. Deeply methodical with a harshly whiplashing tone that ranges from fantastical to downcast, set deeply within a cultural backdrop. For Dujana it was Palestine, and for Judero it's Scotland. Exceptional effort was put into crafting this stop-motion representation of the Scottish Highlands from hundreds of years ago, and wow, I'm genuinely at a loss for words. This game is breathtaking in a way that bellows, I spent months achieving this one shot with every composition. The camera follows your every move, and regardless if you're up in the foreground or a small speck on the cliff, every frame feels like a painting. I can't say I've been to Scotland before, but if it looks even remotely as tranquil as Judero, No, it doesn't. I'd like to imagine the real Scotland rests somewhere between this game and Trainspotting, just with more fried Mars bars. Rolling hills, ensnaring forests, rocky cliff sides, hardy villages, the game portrays a culture in near complete symbiosis with nature that leaves you feeling airy and thirsty for more as you keep playing. Nature is an omnipresent factor for the characters just as much as the player. Human settlements are far and few in between. One of Judero's abilities involves possession in a very animistic sense. Farm animals greatly outnumber people. The goal to represent the Highlands isn't just achieved through the visuals, but through the characters and world building. Each voiced character has that deep, guttural Scottish accent that charms me oh so much.
The mountain replies, "O shepherds too, a betrothed one weeps and grieves from morning till night. It is so sad."
Oh, and well they might. It bothers me not.
It bothers me.
Listen to the music, just listen to it. These aren't imitations of classic songs. Many of these are hundreds of years old and required extensive studying from the documentation of Francis James Child's work in the 1800s. only given light facelifts with modern arrangements, creating a masterful blend of historical truth that's easy on the ears for a zoomer like myself. Additional compositions by longtime producer and programmer Talha Kaya, artist Beth Sabrensi, and vocals by Charlotte Strawbridge craft a soundtrack that can be whimsical, threatening, grand, and introspective all at once. Every chord is gentle, like the musicians playing them are doing so quietly to not disturb the insects strewn about the grass. I guess that's why the OST costs almost as much as the game itself. I've never claimed to be much of a history buff, but the entire experience feels like playing the middle section of an ancient epic. Judero's struggles against local monsters involves just as much philosophical waxing as it does brain bashing. Things feel very rigid in a theatrical sense, where characters verbally explain themselves and their motivations like they would on stage. Combine that with Spooner's expertise in crafting dour odysseys, and we get a splendidly beautiful but woefully lonely adventure through the mystical times that captures the raw, unimpeded sense of adventure found in the trials of Heracles and whatever Beowulf had to do. Nearly every in-game object or NPC elicits a reaction from Judero, who gives some witty, matter-of-factly commentary that can be downright hilarious with how blunt it is. I would be remiss if I didn't praise this game's stop-motion animation, which makes Hylics 2 look pale and underachieving in comparison. A making-of video feature within the game itself details Spooner crafting models from clay and taking thousands of pictures to then import them directly into Unity. The DIY shoestring budget Spooner's games are made with force him to get creative, so the sky being entirely crafted out of paper surprisingly doesn't look out of place. The models pasted onto the 3D environments gives the game a look I can barely compare to anything else. It should look uncanny, but it doesn't, because characters cast shadows and leave footprints. They feel like tangible parts of this world. I've sung the praises of how good this game looks and sounds, but how do you actually play it? You may be surprised to hear that this isn't a linear adventure game, but rather a hack and slash, but in the most technical sense possible. Judero is a fearsome warrior that carries a staff larger than his whole body, and he can use it to smack whatever ungodly Highland creature around until they croak. He has a dash motion to evade attacks that can be held down to sprint. So the core combat mostly involves hit-and-run tactics because button mashing will get your ass wombo-comboed pretty quickly. And that's not because enemies are intricately programmed or can interrupt your swings, but because this game makes the absurd decision to not have any invincibility frames for you whatsoever from what I saw. So getting pushed up against a wall or having to dodge 2 different attacks can very easily melt your entire health bar. You take a ton of knockback, but while in that knockback state, you can get slammed from behind with no way to defend yourself. So the key is entirely in positioning, which makes an already rudimentary combat system pretty frustrating to engage with. There are unlockable upgrades you can purchase with coins found in treasure chests and fallen enemies that expand your moveset, and these range from worthless to critical. The 360 direction spin can be spammed with total impunity, and this rock projectile is useful for finishing fights at a distance, but actually getting the rock to connect is something with a trial within itself. Basically 100% of the fights involve sneaking a few hits when an enemy isn't about to attack, then dashing away and waiting for it to stop attacking, and this gets stale very quickly. God forbid you have to do that with more than one enemy at a time. It's not a challenging system, it's just very irritating to keep repeating over and over again. But remember that possession mechanic I glossed over? Judero can actually possess the enemies and use their signature attacks, mostly useful for puzzle solving rather than applicable in combat, because it leaves the main body Judero completely vulnerable. The puzzles in this game all have a bit of jank built into them with hit detection, which the entire game struggles with to an extent, but none of them are anything I'd describe as hard or unreasonable. They sometimes just require good reaction time and maybe a little bit of luck. The Scottish Highlands are divided into several small maps you have almost free range to explore at your leisure, bar a few story-pertinent roadblocks. You have some side quests alongside each major monster boss fight you need to complete as Judero wanders the Highlands as a nomad. None of these maps feel too confusing to navigate, and exploring always rewards you with coins or a page from the game's bestiary, so it's encouraged. About the game's story, good luck. It's certainly poetic, is what I can say. Judero has to travel to the top of the fabled Glass Mountain, which sounds as classically heroic as it gets, but rather than entirely facing a big bad at the end, the antagonist of this game is described as enmity across the land. Enmity meaning to feel hostility from someone or something. It's meant to be vague, characterized as townspeople becoming cross and less friendly with each other, animals becoming less responsive, with the church and classic fairy tale characters like Rumpelstiltskin becoming cynical and depressed. People just feel off, like society has regressed, but no one can quite explain why. This makes Judero's journey a lot more sociological and questions the far simpler motivations within a hero's journey. How does that end? Well, you might want to play this one yourself to find out. There are oodles of metaphors and eccentric poetry and contemplative explorations of the self that I can't quite do justice within this one video. Judero lasts around 3 to 4 hours depending on how much time you spent doing things, but what really sealed my fate was that the combat was just boring at the end of the day. You should really be treating this like a gorgeous adventure game that sometimes has boss battles rather than a tried and true hack and slash, which is clearly the prevailing opinion surrounding this game, netting in a very agreeable, very positive status on Steam. For around $20, I'd say it's worth it. Jack King Spooner found a ton of notoriety with this release because it outpaced Dujana in far less time when it was released on Steam, on my 23rd birthday no less. I'd say it's the best thing to come out of the 16th throughout the ages, but there's not exactly a lot of competition on that day. Spooner uses Kickstarter to fund his games for measly budgets, with his next project, Machina, only netting a couple more £1,000 than Judero did. Even if Judero hardly made any money, I have no doubt in my mind that Spooner would continue to make games regardless. Because if there's anyone you can accuse of being driven by passion more than riches, it's him. It's not a shocking statement to say that a ton of these indie games are clearly inspired by something else, if not another indie game. The kind of surreal dungeon-crawling Psychopomp revels in is found in classic cult titles like LSD Dream Emulator, and Blood-Soaked Brother is just one in a long line of RPG Maker horror games. You can usually tell what a title's priorities are based on the games they're inspired by. So when I say that BURRGEIST is inspired by Shadow of the Colossus and Drakengard, that should conjure some hyper-specific imagery. A very lonely and possibly schizophrenic game with a jaw-dropping atmosphere and focus on larger-than-life battles and conflicts, and indie gaming has finally gotten far enough to replicate those PS2 cult classics. On a mere glance, BURRGEIST is clearly trying to resemble games in that time period, with extensive Killer 7-esque cell shading caked into the visuals to give it a unique look. I'd rather say it looks like Killer 7 than to say it looks like Ruby, but your preferences may vary. The PS2, unsurprisingly, is the console I'm most fond of for its unfathomably large volume of classic games, ones that I grew up with and ones I've grown to love in more recent years. And the best possible compliment I can give BURRGEIST is that it feels right at home. It's a very strange blend of third-person action, real-time tower defense, and action platforming. I'll explain. You play as local edgelord Ignace, who is capable of sprinting around a reasonably sized open-world map at blistering speeds with a variety of attacks, but there are no random enemies to use them on. Instead, there are several locations dotted across the map where you have to build massive ivory towers, which then summon hordes of monsters called abhorrors to attack the tower before its completion. You're capable of throwing fireballs that scale in damage depending on how high up you are, meaning that parkouring and platforming is essential to survival, as well as a variety of other attacks like melee and some defensive spells. However, you aren't alone, because the titular BURRGEIST, one of these abhorrors that is able to be commanded by Ignace, also contributes by firing cannonballs wherever you please. The controls work as follows. Ignace is controlled by the analog stick and face buttons, while BURRGEIST is controlled by the D-pad, and holding the D-pad opens the face buttons to control him that can be switched with the right trigger and bumper buttons, and both characters can be controlled at the same time. BURRGEIST can be ordered to move to a specific spot, follow you, or stay put, as well as being ordered to attack a specific scalable area or target. You'd think this big lug would be insanely sluggish and hard to control at the same time as controlling Ignace, but that's not the case at all. BURRGEIST is shockingly quick on his feet, actually, with perfect pathfinding. There were very few moments I found myself frustrated with having to control him at all. If you outright abandon him, he just shows back up like Watson. It's awesome. This game very easily could have had robot alchemic drive controls, and if you know, you know.
This morning I had some soup. Bread. It's a proper meal. It's called bread and water soup.
This means that you should really be using a controller to play this game, otherwise risk losing both your hands trying to use the keyboard controls. All controllers should work fine, but it's really weird this game has no PlayStation controller glyph support whatsoever. It's Xbox only, which I get for the most part, but considering this game's inspirations, it seems like a missed opportunity that an update should rectify. The tower defending involves waves of horrors in all different shapes and sizes coming to attack you. From small fry you can pimp slap away to giant boss enemies that require your full attention. You and BURRGEIST must work in tandem and be quick on your feet. How I played was by prioritizing BURRGEIST to handle the swarms while I scouted the maps for those annoying trumpeter enemies that summon these little bombers and prevent the tower's completion, something only matched by those terrifying boss encounters you fight at the end. These half-organic, half-architecture designs get under my skin, I'm not gonna lie. You do have a limited health pool and magic is not infinite, but honestly, this is a very forgiving tower defense game. You can play fast and loose, so being cautious is a very dumb idea that's going to lead to your defeat. So don't be afraid to play recklessly. As far as the genre goes, you're in for a frantic but entirely fair challenge. But you best not lose a single one of these, because some of these fights can last over 30 minutes, and I can only imagine the utter heartbreak someone would experience having to do all of that over again. I wouldn't know though, because I've never lost. I may have been elected Balloon's Tower Defense Champion in grade 6, so perhaps I'm biased. Both characters can be upgraded. BURRGEIST's cannon arrangements can be expanded and moved around. Ignace's magic can be equipped however you'd like with upgrades, equipment, experience point, and the works. If you think it can be cheesed, I promise you it can be, so exploit every possible cheap tactic because some of these enemies are a huge dickache to deal with. I'm looking at these guys specifically, they make me want to commit ending E. Given that the game is open world, you can run around the map and choose which towers to construct in whatever order, with some being a lot more challenging than others because of the specific enemy spawns or locale, like the generic grasslands or the desert. But you do gain fast travel warping between towers, so you're completely free to bounce around the map as you please. The locations you run across are appropriately lonely for a game like this, but also just fun enough to zip around at mock speeds. It's essentially the middle-aged French countryside, dotted with ruined fortresses repurposed by shopkeepers and overtaken by nature. But why exactly rebuilding these massive towers? Okay, so the story is nothing short of absolutely bonkers here. Get ready for this massive info dump within the first 5 minutes. Ignace is a soldier fighting in a war that meant nothing to him. Then he lost his arm and became disabled, but he was offered a job for a local research experiment on demons, where he met a test subject named Lucille and the two fell in love. The actual details of the experiment are not something Ignace wants to talk about, but when a breakthrough was achieved and everyone was let off, he rescued and wifed Lucille up, and then adopted another test subject named Eto. The family lived happily, despite Lucille's fragile and sickly state, until they didn't, because she fell under what I can only describe as a magic coma. And at the same time, Eto was contacted by presumably a demon named Axiom, who told Ignace to build a tower that reaches to the heavens to bring his wife back. Building anything taller than the church is forbidden, so the family travels to a distant land to get her done. Which leads us into the story. If you're confused at all the background information thrown at you very quickly, don't worry. You're supposed to be. BURRGEIST isn't interested in providing linear or clear explanations, rather it wants you to feel disoriented and confused to match the dire feelings of Ignace, so trying to desperately save his wife from her fate. A lot of the magical stuff is glossed over, like the existence of alchemy and demonic activity, though he insists that demonic is a term used to describe inexplicable phenomena versus the classic fire and brimstone visuals we're all used to, which I guess is a way to explain why Axiom communicates through a game of Charlie Jarley. Details like the war and the intricacies of the magic system can be found in the expansive lore documents in your menu, which have an awesome aesthetic, by the way. But you're really supposed to feel confused and a little sad. It's clear that this world is brutal and operates on old customs just as much as magic, even if it's never shown. and me wanting to see more of it is a clear sign that the world building has done its job to suck me in. The cutscenes, while animated fairly stiffly, are saved by the game's powerful use of scene composition. The camera follows the characters in motions and stops during tense conversations, which is basically all of them, leading to some very powerful scenes. Every time you create a tower, you get a scene of Ignace talking to an NPC, some of which feel like weird concepts the writing team thought up specifically to disturb the player. Some are conversations between him and his mentor, some involve this mysterious talking abhorrer missing most of her head, and some involve a man stuck inside of a suit of armor since the beginning of the war and the backstory. Just weird bits of lore drops that make the world feel so much stranger, and I really can't get enough of it. When there aren't direct cutscenes, we get narration during gameplay when encountering something new for the first time, usually recanting a conversation between Ignace and someone else, kind of like how Hideous in Final Fantasy X would always have something depressing to say in cutscenes. It adds a lot. However, there is something that really bothered me throughout this playthrough, and it's the localization. The studio behind it is Japanese, and I'm sure you know that translating Japanese to English or vice versa is a brutal endeavor because of how different the languages are, but something about this specific job just feels clumsy, like it's stepping over itself. There are a few really clunky sentences and typos, and a lot of the dialogue feels like extremely wooden prequel dialogue. I have no doubt in my mind that the very dry conversations were written like this in Japanese to match the tone, which it does, but I just felt a real stubbornness from the dialogue, a lot of "it can't be helped" moments, if you know what I mean, where the translation works enough to be coherent and still entertaining to an English audience, but really could have used another look to make it vibrant and pop. It's not quite Legend of Dragoon level, but around something like Lux Pain, where some lines just make you go, huh? The open world feels great to explore, but I feel like there should have been more work done to differentiate which towers were more approachable to newcomers and which ones will kick your teeth out in the first run. Well, actually, I kind of like that aspect. It helps make the game feel freeform and hostile in that experimental PS2 game that actively hates you way. And the gulfs in difficulty aren't too vast between both options, but that design mentality is a little harder to swallow in a game from 2024. This is a stable game for the most part. I did experience a couple moments of lag and a few game crashes, but nothing that would seriously hamper my experience, even if Ignace likes to bug out and walk on water sometimes. There is an ending that can be achieved extremely quickly, but fully completing the game and getting the true ending involves building a lot of towers, which some people can find tiring quickly, but by no means is this a long game, even if you do all the side quests, but it certainly hasn't outstayed its welcome for me. The atmosphere was everything. This is a killer vibe, and anyone who's into that needs to get on BURRGEIST yesterday, even if that means the music is incredibly out of the way and lets the sounds of nature and cannon fire take center stage. I won't beat around the bush and say there isn't some jank, because there is. You'll miss jumps because of awkward level geometry, the camera will fidget and sometimes work against you when you really need to see what's happening in front of you, and there's all sorts of little irritations, but this is still more polished than your average 2000s title, especially considering its inspirations. The story goes to some very weird places, but just keep playing it on your own time. Trust me, for a measly $16 Canadian, this should be considered highway robbery. BURRGEIST was made by Girin? I think that's how you say it? And this wasn't their first PC game. Their previous title somehow has more resemblance to a PS2 game, which is shocking, but I'm so ready for games like BURRGEIST to lead the cause of PS2-style indies, because I'm already sick to death of PS1-style games. If I have to see another game that's just Resident Evil but worse in every way, I'm going to lose it. You know what game I'm talking about. Girin Studios has made BURRGEIST a more comfortable experience because they have a whole decked out website with tips and guides and everything you could want, including merchandise, which is really unexpected for a game as obscure as this. As of March of this year, they've announced a major update that will add a new tower, some new magic, and character encounters that was supposed to come out this year, but as of now it hasn't been released, so who knows. If this game gets a physical PS5 edition after the update, I'll make a full video. I promise. You know what? I'm not even going to give this one an intro, just look at this game. Physically use your eyes and look at what you're seeing. I always make a point to highlight the visuals and art styles of independent games because it's such an important, crucial way for these projects to stand out. And at least for me, I feel like you can really tell where the priorities of a team and developer lie within how they depict their game. Not everyone is an artist, so sometimes their ability is succeeded by ambition, so some of these games still have a ton of effort put into their mechanics and marketing, and can look lacking, but when you hit that perfect blend of artistry and gameplay, where you see a project that simply feels complete in its totality and not using an easy-to-make art style to simply make it exist, as in there was a unified, clear vision of what it was supposed to be, you get Moroi. I have no idea if that's pronounced M-R-O-I_ or just Moroi, but I'm going with the latter. I've already mentioned LSD Dream Emulator beforehand, but what exactly keeps that game fresh and interesting? What keeps it as a recurring piece of inspiration for countless gamers? How about the off-the-wall baddie visuals? Ambient music? Unpredictability? The fact you're never quite sure what is going to happen or where you'll end up? It's all of the above. And I am absolutely positive that no other indie game understands this and translates this better than Moroi, so it makes sense it was conceived as a contribution to LSD Jam 2024, a yearly contest where tons of different developers create games that try and match the chaos of the OG game. This game settles neatly somewhere between the Sega Dreamcast and an early 2000s PC game like Gothic or Postal 2, where it's not entirely low poly in the colloquial term, but doesn't articulate individual fingers on any of the character models either. Despite the harsh edges and blocky architecture, it never stops each location from feeling alive, sometimes literally. There's a grainy filter over the entire game that does take some getting used to, however. It gave me a tiny headache until I adapted, and I can see that being a problem for players with more sensitive eyes, so the lack of an option to turn it off is a little disappointing. Speaking of visual feedback, just look at our massive, overstimulating hub, and I use that term endearingly. False self, our player's character's head split in half, a location indicator, a timer, whatever the hell this is. Half of the items here are completely superfluous and take up space, but that's the point. Your entire journey is supposed to be a disorienting romp through various dreamscapes, so the visual noise does its job splendidly. But a timer, what's that about? In a game mechanic I feel somewhat mixed about, we're only given 5 minutes at a time to explore at our leisure when we wake back up in the real world, requiring us to take our prescription to go back to Dreamland. Now, there is an explicit reason why we're interrupted, partly for story reasons, but also character building. Look at the garbage surrounding our room. The lights of our computer shine brighter than the sun's. We're playing as a hikikomori who takes Latuda, apparently an antipsychotic medication that I believe is meant to treat schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So these moments are important to color our perception of these dreams and explain why our player character escapes their life by sleeping it away. But having to wake up every 5 minutes to take a pill and slump into bed gets extremely repetitive extremely quickly, and leaves me dreading that last minute of the timer. Yume Nikki, an incredibly similar game to LSD in core concept, lacks the timer, but there are plenty of moments where you have to wake up and restart your dream exploration. But it feels a lot better because the transition from being awake to sleeping lasts less than 5 seconds. Meanwhile, Moroi is closer to 30. Yes, I do realize I am comparing these games by literal seconds and understand how pedantic that sounds, but those 30 seconds a pop add up. And even then, Yume Nikki's diary writing system feels more satisfying to engage with even though it takes more time because it's a very quick save system that feels natural within the setting. Of course you're going to write in a dream diary after a dream. Moroi just doesn't have that same in-between sauce, but if popping a pill went as quickly as going back to sleep in Yume Nikki, I'd like it a lot more. That's the gist of this game. We explore dream locations and have to chart out a map of these interconnected areas in our heads, or on paper if we so please. But this is a much shorter experience in either LSD or Yume Nikki, so that grand map won't be very expansive and won't be a hassle to memorize. We've got linear doorways all around, but more interesting than memorizing those are, of course, the locations themselves. Moroi is hyper-aware of that liminal space trend that's all the rage in the 2000s, and it utilizes that sense of lonesome wanderlust throughout snowy abandoned apartment complexes, infinitely long pool grounds, the sky, flooded cities, fleshy cities, in the occasionally more abstract representation of our main character's psyche. This anime psyche room is awesome, I love it. It's my favorite area. The psychological aspect of this adventure is immediately present, so you're encouraged to try and dig deep in our protagonist, Lisa's, mind to piece her life together. because she sure as hell won't tell anyone willingly. Art exhibits, the mishmashing of architecture and technology scream isolation, depression, unfulfilled creativity, internet addiction, and worst of all, being a weeaboo. The adventure looks and feels like a Videodrome delusion scrambled from CCTV footage, vastly different from a million other games attempting to be LSD. All these locations have appropriate ambience and make you feel like a speck. Hell, there are some threatening encounters with these entities throughout that walk a fine line between being a fabrication of Lisa's mind or a separate being altogether, but we're never quite given the answer. The game allows you to choose between first, third, and whatever angle this is. A few of these locations require some platforming, which is not the game's strong suit, I'll admit. Very stubby jumps that feel like you're on the moon combined with platforms that are never quite in comfortable range means you're going to be missing a lot of jumps in this area, guaranteed. I played this game at the beginning of 2025, and it was a rough release. Multiple times I fell through the floor or got stuck on level geometry and had to reset the game. And I didn't even know this until recently, but there was supposed to be a save system this whole time. It just never worked until a month ago. Mind you, there have been a ton of patches since then. The length of this game means if you dedicate a single afternoon to it, you won't even need the save system. But I can't ignore that part of this game just didn't work for months. But why is there a save system in the first place for a freeform adventure? Well, there's actually a pretty linear story here. The first time you explore, you're bound to run into this girl here, some kind of ghostly figure named Elpis, who's hooked up to some tubes and floats around and generally lies in your dreams. But she insists she's her own person, despite our protagonist's insistence that she's experiencing some kind of delusion. Their conversations range from being introspective and serious debates about the nature of consciousness and how their dreams are connected, to just making fun of each other. It's a mysterious but endearing relationship that keeps evolving as you find this girl all over your mind. Most locations have a unique conversation that plays in order each time you meet her, and thankfully the conversations pause the timer. This gives you the freedom to explore at your leisure and still continue the story, while the last few conversations only trigger in specific areas once you've unlocked the rest. What happens when you get to the end? Well, I'll leave that up to you. All I'll say is that you might want to peep these mysterious codes that are etched all over the world, because they may or may not be part of a kind of ARG. There's a ton of under-the-hood storytelling with this game that helps fill in the blanks I've intentionally left. I hope you can see why the save system not functioning is a pain in the ass, because it was supposed to trigger with every new conversation you have so you don't have to start back at square one, especially after a crash. But again, this game lasts an hour, and a bit more if you're looking for all those codes. Oh man, I didn't even talk about the music, did I? I'm not exaggerating when I say this may be one of my favorite ambient track lists of all time. I've already been playing it in the background, but really absorb the atmosphere here. The vibes are unscrupulous, genuinely one-of-a-kind and magnificent, something well worthy of not just a separate listen, but a purchase. But you can't even really do that, because the soundtrack in this game are completely free because they were part of a game jam. This was actually what inspired me to make this entire video, so go play Moroi, it's wonderful. I suppose its biggest flaw is that if you aren't enraptured by the visuals and the whole genre of surreal walking sims, then there's not much here for you. And aside from the technical issues, our running speed is a little bit slower than I think it should probably be, but not to an irritating degree. Some locations are definitely better than others, but that's just the nature of games like this. It's impossible that over 30 areas are all going to be ranked S+. This road location kinda kissed my ass though. Moroi was a creation of Verba Roots, a development team of 2 people. Dosagoi, I hope I'm saying that right, and Saint Pesticide. Dogasoi created all the assets herself, as well as writing all the dialogue and drafting the story, while Saint Pesticide was the primary music composer, sound designer, and programmer. If those names sound familiar, that's because Pesticide is a developer in their own right, creating more than a couple games, including the Kingsfield-like Blue Worm that's set to release on Steam soon. Dosagoi seems to be working on Moroi 2 for the next LSD jam that's been going on since October and set to end in March of next year, so you can look forward to that. I also just want to shout out her website because even the blogs she has are preoccupied with aura farming. Most of the games I found were through idle browsing and occasionally through word of mouth, but this entry here is something I didn't so much find as I stumbled across it. Like I was looking to simply photograph a nice looking cave and I accidentally found the Ark of the Covenant. I was just going through a Steam sale, as I do, when I came across this game called Marmot Fight Club, and as silly as I thought it was, I still decided to buy it. I don't even know what a marmot is, they just look really funny. It was a very strange, borderline asset flip game where you fight other marmots in an arena from a Japanese developer named Rentaka. After I became the champion of Marmot Island, I perchanced upon the developer's earlier work, which consisted mostly of low-rated, cheaply produced horror games, but one of these immediately caught my attention. This one right here. The game's title's in Japanese, but it auto-translates to The Game Created by the Vanished Friend. The Steam page's English translation is pretty questionable, but it details the premise. Your best friend has gone missing and left behind an unfinished video game on his computer, and of course, that game is the game we get to play. I searched high and low for any information on this game in English, but came up with absolutely nothing. None of the screenshots looked alike whatsoever. I was so baffled that I instantly paid the $13 it cost and booted up the game, and what I saw was interesting. This is our main menu, and it's completely indescribable. Seemingly random photos of people, both censored and non-censored, are pasted everywhere with total abandon, half of which lead to cryptic images. Floods of text that are barely legible, the background scrolls while this one image throbs. This is a total nightmare to behold. But I kind of love it in a way I'm really struggling to put into words. It doesn't feel entirely like random placement due to being sloppy, but intentionally disrupting, like something you'd see in the Silver Case. There are several Word documents and emails you can read from your missing friend's perspective, and there is an English translation option, but it has to be one of the most broken ones I've ever seen. Like, the game's entire script was filtered through Google Translate or something. Because of this, trying to follow this game's plot is borderline impossible in English, but I'll do my best to explain. I'm sure there are more subtle details and plot beats I'll miss because of this likely machine-generated translation, so perhaps there's a super deep story happening here that's totally flown over my head, but not all of these titles are going to be for an English audience. The game is divided into scenes that are all sorts of vertical slices for this game your friend was making, and the first one is an incredibly rudimentary FPS game, and I mean so unfinished that it looks like an abandoned Hammer editor map. Everything is gray and bleak, with our obstacles being incredibly out-of-place placeholder enemies that look like the blurry photographs of real people from the menu, and it feels like you're being chased by Nextbots the whole time. There's nothing really to do here aside from platforming and shooting, all of which work exactly as you'd expect, except that our friend apparently prioritized a sprinting bar out of all things. One of the most annoying mechanics in all of gaming is something he went out of his way to program first. Awesome work, bud. It depends on the person if you find this nearly gray, void, unfinished aesthetic creepy or not, but I'd like total lack of music personally. Something the game does phenomenally well and later on. Reaching a well unlocks our next scene, which is completely different from the next one, which is the core gimmick of the game. Also, for some reason, the game has the most aggressive controller rumbling I've ever seen in my life. Instead of a bare-bones FPS game, we get a more traditional horror chaser experience where we're being chased by this lady in red while we have to collect 5 bags of something throughout the staircase of this apartment complex. It's a very basic chaser sequence, just keep looping up and down the steps and occasionally use this elevator, if she hasn't caught a ride herself on it that is, to weave between floors. The chasing mechanic is by far the most interesting part because I feel like it really leans into the unfinished aspect of this entire project. Think about some of the most iconic horror chasing monsters of all time. They usually have some super recognizable audio track or sound effect to signify that you are actively being chased and need to evade or hide from them to not get caught. This scene contains nearly no audio feedback whatsoever, meaning the only way you can ever tell you're being chased at any given moment is to physically turn around and check. The chaser is pretty slow, so there won't be many moments where you're totally blindsided, and because of how claustrophobic and small this area is, checking your surroundings constantly isn't an entirely unfair task. I was honestly pretty spooked having to turn around constantly to see if I was being chased or not. It gave the entire chapter a serious sense of burning dread, even more so combined with this harsh but really magnificent glitchy look. No, your graphics card isn't dying on you, that's just how this segment looks, and the willingness to strongly lean into distinct styles for each chapter makes them all feel super fresh and original, even if the gameplay is simple. However, this experimental move is also the game's biggest downfall. Right after this chapter is one that involves doing menial tasks for your grandfather, and it adopts an incredibly ugly, polished look that's sore on my eyes and causes the game to lag insidiously. This chapter didn't have the same kind of poorly designed, intentionally feeling, it just actually feels like ass. Like it was designed by someone using Unity for the first time, harsh bloom effects and all. And even extends to the gameplay that involves manually playing with the swing for a couple seconds and then doing some boring ass task for Grandpappy, like pulling up weeds or picking up boxes. I will say that when those flat image next bots come back, they stop chasing you outright and just stare. The contrast of these 2D images flipping and monitoring you in this realistic environment is a very neat contrast. The photos themselves just look uncanny, and I'm not just referring to the censorship applied. The backgrounds are blurry, proportions are just off, and I think I know why. Steam insists that this game uses AI-generated content, which is honestly kind of cringe and makes me like the game a lot less, but I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that these pictures are likely AI-generated. AI is still very much stuck in the uncanny valley for me of something trying to appear human and clearly isn't, so the usage of AI-generated photos to specifically unnerve the player is actually a pretty damn smart move. But what is this game's story about? Again, hard to explain in English, but I think our friend was kidnapped by some kind of cult, and he knew it was going to happen, so he created this game and projected his fears and some kind of childhood stories into it. So the last few moments of the game are a kind of recreation of what he feels might happen to him soon, and if it's anything like this, then we have every reason to be afraid. There's definitely more underlying mysteries to this game, because for the life of me, I can't figure out how to get these two achievements. But that's the reality of finding and playing ultra-obscure games. Not all of them will be in English, and you either have to wait for a fan translation, go in raw, or try and learn the language. And I'm still in the kana memorization part of learning to read Japanese, so please bear with me. Maybe it's a game I'll have to revisit once I can read fluently. There are plenty of Japanese-only games that still have a presence in English-speaking countries, but their impact is going to be inherently limited. But recall that I said it was nowhere to be found on the English-speaking internet. On the Japanese internet, it's the total opposite. There are plenty of videos with over 1 million views detailing this adventure, which revealed that there's actually some kind of hidden route you can take for another ending. Let this game be a reminder for those who search for obscure games. They often involve having to leave your comfort zone to find projects outside your language. I wouldn't recommend this being the game specifically as your catalyst for learning Japanese because it's kind of mid, to be honest. But mine was Dragon Tycoon Age, so what do I know? So there were supposed to be 9 games originally, hence the thumbnail, but this video is kind of a mess in the background. It was supposed to come out a long time ago, so I'm deciding to give you a 10th one. Enjoy. The quirky Earthbound-inspired RPG. You've heard the term, seen the games, it's beyond a dead horse. The whole stable's looking like Ravenholm at this point. Sometimes you get a Hylix out of it, but most of the time, we're stuck with a noun verb. Plenty of these are good games, but the specific tone and general pool of inspirations a lot of these titles draw from start to feel really, really repetitive and stale, which is why this term started as something endearing to now a cudgel to make fun of new indie devs with, which can definitely feel mean, but I'm not gonna pretend like I don't find it hilarious and say it all the time. It's one of the most tired genres there is. which makes it perhaps the very best example of this video's topic. Games that get overlooked and buried on the internet. Really, you could choose any game that has sub 100 reviews on Steam or exists in some itch.io pile trying to be the next Undertale, but I've got a special one I'd like to talk about, and it's called Samuelgame. What expectations would one have in mind for a game with this title? How about a road trip around America where you have to deal with all sorts of cryptids, evil conspiracies, furries, while you play as the titular Samuel, the rad skeleton protector of the country itself, and acts as its guardian to be summoned whenever it's in a time of crisis, which is all the time because it's America that just happens over there, all while sporting a sick pompadour and devil may care, but I care immensely attitude. Believe me, the pompadour is the least ridiculous part of Samuel. Quirky Earthbound-inspired RPGs love their small towns and young awkward protagonists, so the decision to create a character as old as the country he's protecting like a glizzy-guzzling Masakado is definitely a move in the right direction for freeing the game from a tired cliche. We can actually guzzle glizzies in this game for your information, but a premise on its own is only as good as its execution, and this game's America is something to marvel at in a strange, sometimes off-putting way. Our introduction starts with an epic prologue about Samuel's status as the guardian protector of the country, but cuts to his worn-down trailer in the middle of Hell, Indiana. Hell is our starting town that's stitched together with failing businesses, run-down houses, and your next-door wizard neighbor, Dale. Every state you visit is a pastiche of its own respective culture mixed with an urban fantasy aesthetic dotted with the creator's special interests. That is to say that every time you get to a new place, you get to explore it and deal with a new cryptid and Star Trek reference that went way over my head. The road trip aspect was easily the game's most distinguishing feature. Each state, from New York to Florida to Texas, carries a completely different look, with varying NPCs that all have something unique to say as you gather your party on your quest to do whatever you're doing. Small details like each state having a different battle background and means of progression helps it stand out and not just feel like a different coat of paint. Some require more rigorous side quest completion, while others are almost entirely puzzle-based. These are well-paced, and I never felt exhausted with one specific area, so you never run into feeling too bored with exploration. Fighting NYC cops, whatever that is in Florida, there are always unique groups of enemies to fight on the streets and in the obligatory sewer sections that ties together the sightseeing aspect wonderfully. There are even gift shops that sell extremely expensive and not very comfortable tourist shirts to commemorate the visit. There's a notable preference to depict lower income areas rather than have something decorative or worth taking a picture of for bragging rights. Nearly every business you visit is failing. The people in each area generally seem miserable or at least troubled in that kind of detached, ironic way so beholden to the genre that inspired this title. Healing yourself is far more expensive in New York than other states because of the ludicrous hospital bills in the American medical care system. Picking up cans and nuclear waste is a primary way to get money. It's not that the game is necessarily mocking places where people throw their garbage on the front lawn, it's quite the opposite. I felt it was definitely a method of critiquing modern American culture, which is more of an undercurrent rather than a main page central feature, but allows you to appreciate the most unloved demographic in all of America. Poor white people, of course. The game's creator is an enthusiast in all things cryptids and the supernatural, so magic and Mothman are not just commonplace, it's an expected, natural part of the setting that has devotees left and right. Also, there are aliens thrown into the mix, but don't worry about that, because if you do, you might just lose your mind with the deepest lore of this game. But why are we even going on this road trip in the first place? Well, someone stole the Statue of Liberty, and now we've got to collect 50 snake parts from all 50 states. Nobody actually wants to collect 50 parts, so all we need to do is hit up a select handful of states. There are detours in other areas, of course, to visit to make our journey feel properly substantial, because what kind of road trip would it be if there weren't huge detours? But the theft of such an iconic piece of Americana is our driving motivator throughout the game. But it does present what I believe to be the game's biggest flaw. There isn't an enormous emotional through line with the characters or the missing statue to fully carry you throughout. You have to search for the statue because it's the Statue of Liberty. It's part of Samuel's job more than what feels like a super compelling character motivation, if that makes sense. There aren't always moments of character development or insight that would drive the player to see more of the game, other than being curious of what stereotypes are being brought to life or get an explanation as to why Texas is a wasteland. It's not that there aren't any deeper narrative or character building moments, there certainly are. I just felt they were a bit far and few in between. Every time we leave a state, we get a council meeting, which kind of plays like the council meetings in Metalocalypse, with a cast of distinct and wacky characters plotting our hero's downfall, which includes our clown, Rasputin, yes, that Rasputin, and a suspiciously Russian skeleton. There are little hints of Cold War-era fear against the Red Scare sprinkled throughout just for safe measure, as you do. The appeal of the game is definitely more rooted in its cast over having a sweeping narrative, and we have quite the cast to follow. Of course, we have Samuel, a too cool for school guy who is not cool at all and cares way too much about whatever the current situation is despite his Dirk Strider sunglasses, and leather jacket that screams emotional unavailability. He's our lead and our jack of all trades in battle, because he has some decent attacking ability to go along with support magic in the form of healing, damage, and mind-reading spells, which reveals that every enemy in the game has unique thoughts to read that also reveal their weaknesses not just by telling you, but through specific emphasis on words, which is always a fun treat. There's Dahlia, a been-there-done-that Batgirl despite her young age, who is the daughter of our wizard neighbor we're required to drag along so she can learn some responsibility throughout the adventure. She's our magic user who has access to just about every element in the game. And there's Cruz. He's Yeek Alex, but a healer and nearly incapable of defending himself physically. Well, there's more to him, but don't worry about it. There are more characters than that, but just worry about these three for now. They do have depth, particularly Samuel and Dahlia, but like I mentioned, these moments are a little too inconsistently placed throughout. You absolutely have an understanding of who these characters are and what makes them tick by the end game, but a lot of that is saved for the end game, which makes it at least a little bit understandable why someone might not feel the pull to get there in the first place. The gamer is hyper aware of what it is and who it's appealing to, and it's more than comfortable poking fun at the target audience and itself, but it did sometimes feel afraid to stand on business with its 2 feet and confidently present a puzzle without a comment about how much of a cliché it was. Despite its RPG Maker base, the combat does take a couple steps beyond bog standard to feel fresher and more engaging. Naturally, we have the stuff that needs no explanation, like our magical elements and character weaknesses and status effects, unless you wanted to know that our primary effects are things like sadness and space-time anomalies, but our physical attacks are split into high and low attacks, which do more damage depending on the foe, and some of these are multi-target versus single target, so you have to think twice before brainlessly mashing your physical attacks. At least for me, magic always felt like a secondary choice because it can be hard to restore your MP without the use of items, which can bite a sizable chunk into your finances you obtained from grinding. Grinding is something I never really felt like I had to do for longer than maybe 15 minutes per area, thank God. It gives you tons of money to play around with and will at least keep you up to par level-wise. And all those bones buy quite a lot of items, which made me very happy because items are extremely useful in battle to a nearly unreasonably broken degree. Don't feel like using magic? Just reach in those deep pockets of yours and throw a flat 400 damage stick of dynamite whenever you feel like it. You absolutely could read someone's mind and use one of Dahlia's spells to deal more damage, but having a guaranteed way to deal nearly the same amount of damage from every character does simplify the extremely rigid roles your party has in battle, and the dynamite's just getting started. Dungeons have much less common but much stronger elemental items that can deal up to 1,000 damage. It's not quite a win button, but it does make battles go a lot quicker with almost no downsides, because money is plentiful and those stronger items still deal like a quarter of a boss's health bar on occasion. I personally found it more entertaining than standard combat because it allows the characters to breathe a bit more and give Cruz something to do if he can't heal bot. Summoning Dracula to take care of a problem for you is pretty cool, too. Better get used to it because the encounter rate is incredibly aggressive, on the level of the early Breath of Fire games. You get this visual warning when you're about to run into something, but they pop up so often I feel like I'm missing something. RPGs live and die by their soundtracks, and Samuelgame is something of a mixed bag. On one hand, there are more than a couple very minimalistic tracks that play several times throughout the game. I don't mind it so much for menus, but it is a little disappointing to hear it be the focal track for a specific state. But on the other hand, some states have some zappy headbangers that are right at home with Earthbound itself. Here's an earful of what this game can sound like. I think it definitely needed more tracks like Florida. Simple but distinct beats that ooze the atmosphere of each area. I'm not saying there has to be a jazz track for New York, as much of a wonderful cliche it is, but something that feels distinctly Samuel American, if that makes sense. I've been pretty vague with this game's story, and that's for a good reason. No spoiling Samuelgame. Seems a bit odd since I beat most of the games I happen to talk about in this video, but there's a really specific reason I'm opting to be so vague and evasive. I haven't talked much about the creators marketing their games throughout, but how exactly does one go through with that process? They could be an established creator or a company that has a small built-in audience, or maybe they're a tiny company with something of an advertising budget. Well, Samuelgame does something wholly original I don't think I've ever seen before. Do me a favor and open up your Discord and type Samuelgame and see what comes up. These GIFs are actually part of a semi-coordinated online marketing campaign to subtly implant its name into your mind depending how online you are. A mimetic implant meant to influence you like MK Ultra, but with memes. Sounds absurd, but it's kind of worked before. Look at the huge spike of people in my Hilux video when I talked about the one GIF most people associated with the game. Tons of comments verify that's the first they heard about Hilux, from that GIF being spread around. So clearly it has an effect on people. The key difference here is that this was a deliberate move by the game's creator, who isn't just some faceless creator, he's actually a friend of mine. Make no mistake, I didn't just include this game as a favor, but because more than anything else, it embodies the foundation of this video's topic. It's harder than ever to stand out as an independent developer, and while fully knowing that, Boder still put his blood, sweat, and tears into this project, and I have an immeasurable amount of respect for that. The game isn't perfect, but no game ever could be. For all of its flaws, there's a heart beating underneath Samuel's ribcage, and it beats for you and I, which is all you could ever ask for. The game is completely free, but I recommend you throw Boder a couple bucks. It's the polite thing to do. There's a ton more to this game I deliberately didn't talk about because you're gonna need to find that out on your own. The deepest lore of Samuel is quite the rabbit hole. Making a game is tireless and thankless work, but I've proven time and time again, you can never predict what game will have an incredible impact on someone. An obscure 3DO RPG never released outside of Japan inspired someone to contribute to the creation of Dark Souls. And you never know who might go on to create something groundbreaking because of what they felt from playing Samuelgame, or if Samuelgame could gain a cult following years down the line. And past all of my praises and criticisms and nitpicks, I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you.